So in October 1660, the regicides of King Charles I of England were brought to trial. They were found guilty of high treason and for that reason were publicly executed. Their punishment was part of the policies that restored the monarchical rule after 2 decades of political turbulence. The regicides' fate had great public commotion for the symbolic and exemplary aspect. As Foucault had pointed out, public executions were commonly employed in order to legitimize the sovereign, and in this case was Charles II. Several pamphlets, ballads, and news sheets have reported and discussed the episode, reinforcing that justice was made. At the same time, other texts claimed the opposite. As it was also noticed by Foucault, public executions could be interpreted by the audience in a complete different sense, as people could sympathize with the penitent and discord from the judge's verdict. When the news regarding the regicide's death crossed Britain's borders and achieved Edmund Ludlow, a regicide who managed to escape persecution fleeing to the Swiss Confederacy, Ludlow felt sorry for his former fellows and for the tragic fate of the cause of Parliament and the cause of God, which once had deposed tyranny but now was overthrown. Aiming to convict, convert, edify, and strengthen others by the examples of the men who died for their cause, Ludlow had decided to translate the regicides' dying speeches into French. In 1663, he commissioned the publication of Le Juge, Jugeus et Justifiant in Yverdon. As this pamphlet was almost completely overlooked by scholars, in this presentation I want to analyze its process of publication, considering its adaptations to a francophone public and the decisions made by the cultural mediators who published it. In order to do so, it is first necessary to describe the text in an attempt to understand how it was made, both materially and textually. Le Juge was published anonymously to present some of the tragic acts that had took place in England since Charles II assumed the throne in 1660, focusing on the condemnation of 15 men who were captured, trialed, and punished as traitors between 1660 and 1662. Le Juge was a collection of the last speeches, prayers, and letters of these men. But rather than justifying their punishment as an act of justice towards the crown and the Stuart family, the text elevated the regicides to the status of martyrs, who were persecuted due to their commitment to the public good and the true religion. The text was composed by a set of various other texts, containing the translation of English pamphlets, the transcription of letters, and the edition of news from the Gazette de France. Concerning its physical aspects, Concerning its physical aspects, Le Juge was a small and cheap pamphlet made to circulate easily. It was printed as an octavo in fours, containing 240 pages in 15 gatherings, hence made with 15 sheets of paper. It has a simple title page with no engravings or ornaments. Its title and subtitle were written in Roman and Italic, and the title page also informs that the work was made just like the English copy published in London. It also carries a Bible quotation that was connected to the martyrological sense of the text. It is from Hebrews 11:4, and it says, "And by it he being dead, yet speaketh." Across the pamphlet, there are minor decorations made with printer flowers. Made with printer flowers on headings and factotums. The first paratexts are a list containing the regicides' names and the respective dates of their deaths, and also a preface to the reader. The text was consistently printed in Roman letters, and italics were mostly used to emphasize some words or to represent indirect and direct speech. And at the end of the text, there was a table of contents. Most of the translation was made from this other pamphlet, the speeches and prayers of some of the late king's judges, published anonymously and clandestinely in London sometime between October and December 1660. It was produced and sold by a group of seditious printers and booksellers who frequently issued anti-royalist propaganda. Namely, they were the printers Simon Dover and Thomas Creek, and the booksellers Giles Calvert, Thomas Brewster, and Leo Chapman. It had at least 3 different editions and many varied impressions caused by the difficult circumstances of its production. As it was produced during a period of reinforcement of the censorship systems, publishers divided the undertaking between different print shops, and printers were forced to interrupt their work several times, causing mistakes and discontinuities across the text. As there is no time to discuss all the variations, I will use as an example this copy cataloged by Wing as S4875, which was a quarto, 100 pages long, containing 12 gatherings made with 12 sheets of paper. It has a simple title page containing the names of the regicides and the date of their deaths. It also has the same Bible quotation that we observed in the French translation from Hebrews, right there. It seems that Le Juge translated not only the content of the speeches and prayers, but also some aspects of its mise en page. The English copy was simple. It was printed in Romans and italics with no ornaments except for printer flowers on the heading of the very first page. As the French version, italics were used to make emphasis or represent indirect and direct speech. It has a preface to the reader, which is very similar to the French translation, both textually and physically. Even if Le Juge was made from the speeches and prayers, the translation required some adjustments to accommodate the work to a Francophone audience. As the process of translation requires a decontextualization and a recontextualization of the text, we can assume that these adjustments transform the sense of the text. The English version was published immediately after the execution of 10 of the regicides, namely Major General Thomas Harrison, John Carey, Justice John Cook, Hugh Peters, Thomas Scott, Gregory Clement, and a series of colonels, Adrian Scroop, John Jones, Daniel Axtell, and Francis Hacker. For that reason, the English pamphlet responded to an immediate interest in their public execution. It also responded to an immediate debate concerning the characters of the regicides. Most of the printed texts circulated in Britain after October 1660 were legitimizing the actions of the government, praising the executions of the traitors. But the speeches and prayers inverted the balance of justice, praising the deceased and condemning the judges. Although Le Juge had the same perspective, it was necessary to adapt the English text to a completely different context. That was probably the reason why the French version has a different title, which is Le Juge juge se justifiant, or in English, the judges judge themselves. And the long subtitle that follows, instead of naming the regicides, instead of having this kind of information, the long subtitle has a kind of context of when this speeches, prayers, and letters were made. So it was informing that the deceased were condemned due to the execution of the late King Charles I. This information would be more important to readers outside of England than the names of the regicides. So that would be probably unknown to most of the people. Therefore, it was more productive to include a general description of the episodes depicted in the pamphlet than having this space filled with the names. Another example of these adaptations can be found in the preface, which stated the reasons for publishing the regicides' dying speeches. The English version was far more emphatic in associating the regicides' actions against the crown to the providence, suggesting that the men were servants of Christ who acted faithfully to defend his cause. The French edition, however, suppressed some of this emphasis and it stated that the pamphlet aimed to let all see the riches of grace magnified in those people that were in their last moment or in their end, instead of referring to the deceased as those servants of Christ, as it was in the English edition. This change might have been a way to soften the praise to the regicides, as Edmund Ludlow would have complained later. But the expression might also have been used because the public did not know the character of the regicides, neither the Republican cause, which was constantly associated to God's cause in this providentialist narrative. So it was necessary to make it more comprehensible to the public. Further adaptations were made not only in the word choice, but also in the order of the texts. The speeches and prayers has 16 parts, while Le Juge has 20. Besides being larger, the French edition is more organized. Some of the letters and additional passages located at the end of the English version were intertwined throughout the words of the respective individuals. So instead of having additional passages from Scrope, Jones, and Cook with a letter from Cook to his daughter, the French version included the passages in the respective parts dedicated to Scrope, Jones, and Cook, thus providing the reader a more linear text. 3 letters by Cook were dedicated to a session of Le Juge, where it seems that the printer organized a set of letters, which is in this yellow box here. Notes from Hugh Peters were suppressed, and there is a substantial additional content at the end of the pamphlet concerning the regicides that were captured and punished in 1662. Oops, I'm sorry, there is here. And also about the execution of Sir Henry Vane, who was not a regicide, but was a prominent political figure who defended the Republic with millenarian expectations. In order to understand this extra material, we need to take a look at the publisher and printer of Le Juge and consider the agency as editors and cultural mediators of the text. As I mentioned in the beginning, the French pamphlet was published by Edmund Ludlow during his exile in the Swiss Confederacy. He was born in 1616 or 17 in Wiltshire and was educated in Oxford. He became a member of Parliament representing Wiltshire. And even before the English Revolution, Ludlow was very critical of the crown. With the outbreak of the civil wars in the 40s, Ludlow was engaged in the Parliament's army, and for that reason, with the regicide as well. He was one of the signatories of Charles I's condemnation, actually. And as a Baptist with providentialist and apocalyptic perspectives, Ludlow depicted the parliamentary cause against the monarchy as the cause of God, associating the events from the revolutionary period to the fulfillment of prophetic expectations. During the Commonwealth and Protectorate, Ludlow official posts being a very prominent political figure. He was forced to flee from London after the Restoration when he noticed that his life was in danger. He stayed in Geneva for a moment, but moved to Lausanne in 1662 and then to Vevey in the same year, where he remained until his death in 1692. During his exile, there were many attempts to capture him, as it happened to other exiled regicides who were forced to return to London to face a trial and be punished for treason. In England, Ludlow was often mentioned in rumors of plots against the king. And for that reason, there were also many speculations concerning his whereabouts. Ludlow had written his memories in a manuscript entitled A Voice from the Watchtower. The surviving parts of the text held at the Bodleian Library refer to the events from 1660 to 1677. In this manuscript, he explained that he had received news concerning the first 10 martyrs while he was still in Geneva. He also explained that he considered it as his duty to have the speeches and prayers of the deceased translated into French. In his own words, Ludlow affirmed, "I looked upon it as my duty that their occasional speeches, which they spoke to friends a little before the execution, together with those which they speak at the place of the execution, and the breathing of the Spirit and their speeches, their prayers might be made public for the conviction, conversion, edification, and strengthening of others." Ludlow also informed that he brought the text to a printer who practiced physic at Yverdon, and that seeing that at the first view of this last wills and testament of the deceased martyrs was very much satisfied of the duty of publishing it. This printer was probably Dominique Chabrey, born in 1610 in Saint-Étienne. He lived in Geneva for some time, where he probably learned medicine and botany. Chabrey moved to Yverdon in 1648 and acquired a press in the following year in order to publish some botanic tracts. He bought Piran de Candolle's printing materials which was one of the first men to work with the press in the city, and one of the founders of the local stationery corporation, the Société Helvetielle Cauderesque. Despite first looking as a good printer for this job, Dominique Chabrey was later criticized by Ludlow, who accused the printer of making too many additions and adjustments in the original text for the better sale of the book, making many gross mistakes and always to the disadvantage of the work. Unfortunately, we do not have manuscripts by Chabrey that could be examined in order to explain his editions, but we may make a few assumptions considering the Swiss book trade. Yverdon supplied printed texts to Lyon and other French cities, and as it was demonstrated by Robert Darnton, the Swiss cities provided many clandestine books to France as well. Le Juge was probably produced to circulate in different European regions, aiming at French-speaking Protestants in France and exiled Huguenots in the Swiss Confederacy and the Low Countries. In this sense, the regicides' dying speeches were not important as a defense of the parliamentary good cause. It was rather significant as an account on Protestant martyrs. So to a transregional Protestant community, the particularities of the English political context did not mean as much as the religious experiences of these martyrs. Therefore, Chabrey probably decided to add narratives on more recent events that were not originally covered by the speeches and prayers of some of the late king's judges in order to update the martyrology to his audience. So Chabrey got information on the trial and condemnation of Miles Corbet, John Okey, John Barkstead, John Lambert, and Henry Vane in 1662 from the Gazette de France. I don't know yet from which numbers he got this information, because just a few volumes of the Gazette are online and we cannot travel right now, so I cannot check the originals. He also got some information from manuscripts and printed texts that came from London. And he added to Le Juge another pamphlet published anonymously and clandestinely in London, entitled The Substance of What Sir Henry Vane Intended to Have Spoken Upon the Scaffold. The text was published by the same group of anti-royalist publishers that printed and sold the speeches and prayers: Giles Culver, Thomas Brewster, and Levo Chapman. What might suggest the existence of a clandestine network for the circulation of texts between England and the Swiss Confederacy. More specifically, a network between English anti-royalists and non-conformists and French-speaking Protestants. Again, the addition of this material was not due to the political relevance of the regicides. And as I mentioned, Henry Vane wasn't a regicide, so there wasn't a reason to put this material in this text. But the content of the book was more important. So the martyrology was more important. And to the construction of this martyrology, it was important to mention those who lived in faith and also died in it. That was the case of Sir Henry Vane. As this is a work in progress and I have no time to bring everything that I'm thinking about this text, I would like to make a few considerations in here and maybe something that could help us in the debate. I'm working with the publication of Le Juge in a chapter of my PhD thesis on the production and circulation of English clandestine and anti-royalist pamphlets from the 40s and the 80s. So these conclusions are provisional, but they can help us to think about the clandestine circulation of pamphlets in a transregional way. If we consider that Le Juge was a cultural translation, it was translated in a cultural sense, in which the process of decontextualization and recontextualization were central for the mobility of the English narratives of the regicides, we may have a broader understanding of this text. As I intended to show, Le Juge was not simply a translation of the speeches and prayers of some of the late king's judges, as Edmund Ludlow wished it was. Le Juge was a gathering of many texts from English and French sources, edited by a printer in Switzerland, who aimed at selling the pamphlet to an international Protestant community. So a very different perspective if we compare with the original text. Therefore, this French text was an entire new undertaking, published in a different form with different goals to supply a different public, and as a consequence, it acquire different meanings. And it was because of these many changes that the text was indeed published. So despite Ludlow's criticism against Chabrey, it was the recontextualization of the regicides' dying speeches that contributed to his main interest, the conviction, conversion, edification, and strengthening of others. Thank you.